but you're going to get a smattering of fiction and poems, mostly fiction, which is what I'm writing most of the time now. But first, a couple of poems. This was printed in the summer '88 edition of Prairie Schooner. It's called Beatitude. It's from a long time ago, almost another lifetime. It was written at Martha's Vineyard on Thumb Point. I have weathered like the shakes on this tumble-down shack, like driftwood. I don't even envy the wind. I look up and the sea blinds me. Yesterday it was royal blue. Today, aqua and gray-green. The cricket that kept me awake last night is still twining his legs in song. The harsh dreams of 3 years, like an alcoholic insomnia, are still with me. Last night, after wine and talk, we fell rudely into some lashing turmoil, some waters, a clash of forces upon me, and you, tenderly awake and drunkenly asleep and turning. The night terror of 2 nights before, yourself a young girl in black silk and pearls, and some smug-eyed, sneering Dutch boy following you everywhere. I was to take you to the hospital. I was impatient with your tremors. You were screaming hysterically. And now I see you reading beside me, and now you are taking my picture, I think, because you admire my intensity. I would offer to you that we are nothing but the movement of the wind through these shrub and grasses, that as you bend to kiss me, I feel touched by the wind also, and wonder who watches us when we flounder, and who cheers, as with the cries of gulls, when we set sail. You can tell that was from a long time ago because it's calmer. This is a prose poem that was accepted by Pebble a long time ago. Greg Kuzma puts out somewhat infrequently or periodically a magazine called Pebble, and he had an issue that he wanted to devote to the business of poetry. He sent out a call for papers and poems and got very little in response, but Sally and myself were both moved, my wife and I. This was a prose poem I wrote on that theme and for that issue. The issue didn't get enough to really warrant its being produced as an issue, so it kind of sits and waits, and I don't know what's going to happen. Of the business of poetry, in search of a poetry bad to the bone. Somewhere in the bastions of humanism, wired, wizened old men with monks' skulls pry their tired, bony fingers from the electric typewriters they have kept hidden all these years, from the style police and the modernity inspectors in the abandoned garret of the old education building at the university, now the learnitarium, where they crane their necks in scholars' stoop under tiny incandescent supernovas that are their desk lamps, laboring in the Caucasian male section over obscure poets from the mid-20th century, Spicer, LaMantia, Sorrentino, Bukowski. One lifts the bill of his Cubs cap and turns down the brightness on the CRT, where he's been transcribing his poems for electronic submission to eternity, he hopes, although this hope has faded some since his early days. He yanks the accordion lid on the old oak roll top and hunkers down the spiral staircase to take a look at the most recent arrival in the academic arrangement of our little purgatory, he says, apologizing for his problem focusing, but he's been squinting over some strange confession. The days run away like wild horses over the hills. Are you the understudy we ordered, he explains, and you are the understudy we ordered, he explains, which is news to you. But look sharp, they told you at the big welcome at the gate. And one thing she just said, have you ever done it in a van? And another thought it was, what really happened to Jim Morrison? When all you asked was, have you ever heard of Rave On, John Donne by Van Morrison? perhaps to discuss the lyrics a little if they had heard the song, but they haven't. None of the four who have gathered at the bottom of the stairs to check out the new kid and begin schooling him in the received tradition of native knowledge needed to succeed in the poetry game as it is played today with the latest in word processing and laser optic telecommunications, says a guy in a taupe suit with elbow patches, stepping forward like a computer salesman from Memphis to give you the inside dope. But aren't we interested in lasers of the mind, you ask? Conversational and witty as a nit. The way I see it, this is the only way to go in this business nowadays, he says. Of course, once we had grants, fellowships, awards, retirement readings, the whole enchilada of job security, dental even. But now it's a tight, easy-come, easy-go game, kid. And these babies help you keep ahead of the competition. Keep the most poems flashing to and from publishers. Every possible ball in the air at every possible moment is what this is. And when you sleep, to perfect this art, a labyrinth of schemes, a handball of publishing, you suppose. That way you'll stay in this game for a long time, long enough to retire comfortably, he explains, to heaven where you are no longer read, because no one is read up there anymore. They just grok, you suppose. As he explains how a little red light sparks on whenever one of the online journals dumps your poem into the sorry file, after which it flows into old return to sender slough, he intones, to be fished out, no longer wet and dripping, dry, whitened, flaky and scaling, smelling to high heaven, but to be revived in the fresh water of the imagination and hawked again in the great fish market of ideas, he says, or thrown back into the big river of bad information, you suppose. But then one day they quit answering your questions. They can't understand why you keep asking them what you already know. So you wise up, go about the business of poetry, begetting and sending, keeping on top of all your investments in the best magazines, like a broker, a supply-side poet, even embracing some of the funkier anachronisms, gathering with students in dark bars to drink and read poems, and rave on as the light of the 20th century changes into the 21st, and then changes again. A flesh-colored dawn with tiny red dying star dots of electronic suddenness. Then you keep on working and wondering, and when you ask, is this all there is? Or, is this just the future? They say, what? And amble away. PCs idling like BMWs waiting. Letter quality printers rapping out strophes like hip-hop. And now when you walk in every morning, they say, hi, stop by your cubicle once in a while to have a chat, having just put the machine on auto mail. And it all seems a little less strange. And then one day one of the younger guys, tall, pale, bald hair, tall, pale, long hair, balding, stops by to introduce himself, and as soon as you say your name, he slaps your back and says, so you wanted to be a poet, huh? And he laughs and laughs and laughs. And the next day you both go in hungover, quit your jobs, and start the bottom feeder's review on the walls above the urinal where you left the dead cart in the faculty-only washroom. There's been a novel in my life.
Has it been published?
No. It's about 250 pages long, and it sort of stopped dead a while ago. But what there is of it, some of it I like anyway. And this is from that. This is picking up where a character, the novel is called Imposters. All of the chapters are a description of a persona that a certain character is adopting. The poet is one that follows this one that I'm going to read called The Confidant, and there are others called The Lover, or The Prodigal, or The Seminary. The main character has just decided he's going to drop out of seminary, and he's going to join with a group of radical ex-seminarians, I guess you'd say. They're going to demonstrate on the White House lawn against the proliferation of nuclear arms. He's not done this yet. There's a woman with whom he hoped something would develop but never did, who stopped by his dorm room to see him just before he goes off to start living with this group of people. They have a discussion that goes from the dorms in seminary into a bar. You're picking up in the middle of this discussion. And it's an ongoing thing, and he's trying to explain why he's doing what he's doing. It's called The Confidant. Here, I say, taking her glass, let me show you something. I pull a scrap of paper from the side pocket of my fatigues. I was just listening to a new Warren Zevon album before you stopped by, and I copied this down, I say, as if at long last to note the final definition of cool. It's called Bill Lee. Billy? No, Bill space Lee. How much do you know about baseball? My father's got a box seat at Shea. I've been a few times. Right. Well, Lee was a pitcher for the Red Sox and later for the Montreal Expos. A good one. Came close to 20 wins a couple of times, but eventually was relegated to the bullpen, where he continued to distinguish himself with his control pitching and his habit of saying whatever the hell he damn well pleased. He admitted to a certain liking for fast music, criticized the top brass, offended his teammates by remarking on the sad state of intellectual stimulation among most ball players and other no-nos, and became known as Spaceman Lee, Superflake. After a few years with the Expos, he was released while still in his prime. He hasn't been picked up by another team since. Lately, he's been running for president on a no-guns, no-butter ticket. Both can kill you, he says. Here, it's on the jukebox over here. I'll play it for you while the band's on break. And this is from Warren Zevon's song, Bill Lee. The lyrics go, you're supposed to sit on your ass and nod at stupid things. Man, that's hard to do. And if you don't, they'll screw you. And if you do, they'll screw you too. When I'm standing in the middle of the diamond all alone, I always play to win when it comes to skin and bone. And sometimes I say things I shouldn't, like, and there's a harmonica interlude in Wah Wah of sorts. And sometimes I say things I shouldn't, like, and there's a harmonica interlude. And then it repeats. See, I've got the Bill Lee disease, sister. I can't be no pastor of souls because this honky won't play fairy godfather to the Rodgers and Hammerstein dreams of suburban housefraus and house munchkins when what the good book clearly specifies is getting down to some rather unsettling business. There's a jump cut to a section about another character who's recently found himself in a federal penitentiary. I can't explain what's going on with him, but that's there. Then we come back to the bar scene. The music subsumes me in a gyrating funk of unabashed R&B, adorned with the hard, fast diamonds and the night's black velvet that are the spontaneities of jazz. Riffs whistling down the line of laser light that is a soprano sax. And she lifts her head, laughing with the guy from Esquire. You don't know if this guy really is from Esquire, but there's been talk of this. I'm laughing, too, at him. Then I overhear him say to the other guy in a mellifluous calm, I just don't believe everyone should get an equal piece of the pie, that's all. And I want to pull Muhammad Ali out from behind a fern the way Woody Allen abracadabras Marshall McLuhan in Annie Hall. I decide I've got to get over this urge to wrestle this moron to the ground immediately and ask questions later like, lemon meringue or banana cream? Why don't you forget the pieces and take the whole thing? In your fucking face, Jack. God, I'll never get to the seventh baseball in rock and roll heaven this way. At least she's done exchanging pleasantries with this Charlemagne of the New Right and leans my way to say, sorry, Dean, but if we don't humor him, he just gets worse, under her breath. And then normally, but anyway, why do you want to be labeled an extremist? What has symbolic politics by fringe groups ever accomplished anyway? If you can attach votes to the symbols, that's one thing, but all alone? Look, I'm really not as Looney Tunes as I sometimes sound, I say, dissembling in the shadow of my own prima facie absurdity, qua self. And I'm far too fond of you to start arguing politics, for very long anyway. If you're worried about my safety, so am I. I appreciate it. But I've got this thing I've got to do. I trust your methods, for you that is. But not everyone's as fundamentally decent or as spirited as you. If they were, we wouldn't need militants, would we? I don't know, she says, dispirit him. I suppose not. But what's so wrong with wanting to work from within the system? Nothing, nothing at all. I just don't think of the problem that way. I think we're working along parallel lines, mostly. But as far as this discussion goes, you're ignoring a central fact of history. The powerful never give up power voluntarily. I think politically we're allies, at least for the time being. But I also think we both get too intense concerning the theoretical sometimes. that maybe we'd see things much more congruently if our two vertical selves could get more reclined than inclined. More ready to wrestle than box, that is. There, I did it. Now watch her right cross. Here it comes. Look at it. Uh-oh. She's smiling at me. I know that smile anywhere. I smile back like I just downed the best chip shit on toast I ever tasted. Now I've done it. Now what if I can't do it? What if we get all ready and I can't finish what I just started? I would if I could, but I can't, except in a way infinitely more circumambulant. Even so, I don't know a woman alive who really appreciates a wilted bouquet, as it were. I have my methods, I say, getting ready to shuffle and shamble, hide my real intentions. The sobering solemnity and sanity that is the millstone in my pocket, the trunk of manuscripts I carry as I go looking for a revolution, or at least a resolution with a basket full of ins and outs all mixed up together. My melancholy. My madness is my own, and I don't hate it yet. Ah, that ought to scare her. I've just been carrying the ball a lot on naked reverses and counters and bootlegs, and nobody's been blocking very much. I'm going to break for some daylight and hope that my life isn't a football game someday. There, that ought to confuse her. Hey, how come everybody around Union wants to change your life, anyway? Good, now I'm getting it back. A touch of it, anyway, that certain timbre in my voice. The one that drives them wild and drives them away at the same time. That whining, ghostly growl like an amplified death rattle. Hey, I'm sorry. I'm not upset at you. I'm just glad I'm getting out of here. 2 years was plenty. Just the right amount of time, really. I think the bitterness will wear off pretty quickly. Here, let me flag down our once and future bartender, I say, taking her glass and mine down the long runway of bar to the bartenders' convention at the other end. But they have just put their last speaker on the plane down to our end, and they suddenly disperse. I trot alongside like a late passenger, pointing to the other end, saying, "That's my bartender." They nod. Yep, sure is. Same conversation. The irony is that it's never been respectable in this country to champion anybody's cause but your own. If you do, people don't trust you, I'm saying, as if I trusted anyone right now. It's just that I get a feeling when I'm walking around Trenton that is nothing like I feel at Princeton or Union or Columbia or even Harlem. New York has its own electricity, for sure, all over the place, in fact. But as far as I can see, the city's just too stuck on itself. He's going to be with these people in Trenton, and they run a soup kitchen in Trenton and organize down there. Trenton is about as much nothing as I've ever seen gathered in one place before. And I've been in Newark, Allentown, and Fargo, believe me. But when I'm out on the streets in a place like that, I get a rush. I can feel the thumping in the hearts of a million damaged dreams and sclerotic hopes. The nobodies of nowhere, USA, who have to make themselves up from scratch in one lifetime, just like we do. Those people don't need a friend or a guru or a therapist. They need leaders, or leadership, to say the least. Or what? Or what the hell is Howard saying? The bartender looks at me, then at the two, hears what I hear, checks my face to see he's not crazy, blanches, looks back at me and then jerks himself away and turns the setup to hear what no one in the place can believe. Tragic, tragic news tonight. That bulletin once again, we have just received word that Sean Lennox was shot tonight outside his apartment in the Dakota building in New York City. More details will be available as they come in. Back to you, Frank. Ouch, says Dandy Don. Ferragamo comes under center, Gifford says, calls the count, the snap. He's back to throw, blitz coming, straight back, now he's forced out of the pocket, moves to the right, look out, oh no! Lawrence Taylor just decked him, caught him between the shoulders in the middle of the back, felled him like a tree and separated man from ball. Wait a minute. Now they're saying the ground forced the fumble. Well, that brings up 4th and 12 for the Rams. Taylor is the most remarkable and aggressive defensive animal in the game today, says the staccato tongue of the unctuous one. Can that big ape hit, or can he hit? Let's not get carried away, Howard reminds Uncle Don. Well, I mean it in a complimentary way, of course. Dean, are you all right, someone says, and I'm thinking of that night again. He's just broken up with a girlfriend, by the way. The first night we broke up, how much I wanted to die then, somehow, any way at all that would allow me to save face. Then I'm talking to myself in my usual grandiloquent schizophrenia, thinking, thank God he's not dead. Shot, of course, but they'll get him to the hospital in no time. He'll be all right. Thank God he didn't say dead. Dean. Somehow 3 or 4 minutes pass. I tell Laura I'm okay, and I'm sure they'll save him. He didn't say dead. He just said shot. She says she sure as hell hopes so. Nice turn of the tongue, implying empathy and grit. I'm cracking up. I've got to get out of here. Got to get down by the river. down by the lovers, fuckers, and thieves, 'cause I love that dirty water. Oh, USA, you're my home. Howard comes back on, camera isolating him as before. I can't hear him because of the buzz in the place. Then Laura starts to mist up and everyone stops talking, and I hear Howard say, once again, shot and killed outside his apartment in the Dakota building tonight in New York City. Just like the first announcement, only with the addition of killed. I've got to get out of here. I feel like I want to kill someone. First the madman who shot Lennox, then myself, then Lee, then the madman, then Lee, then myself. Lee is the woman he's been going with that just broke up with him. Not this woman he's speaking to, obviously. This is the second assassination of a major public figure today, in what must be assumed at this point to be a mere coincidence. However, Jefferson Stone, cut down by an assailant's bullet earlier this evening, and Lennox were seen together a few times shortly before their untimely deaths. Aides to Stone have said that he and Lennox were discussing the possibilities of Lennox doing a fundraising concert for Stone's presidential campaign. I've got to split this dive now. Why can't I get moving? Can't say what I need to say. Can only sit here thinking, why is Howard doing this to me? I thought he would be all right. You don't just walk up and shoot Sean Lennox. Stone, maybe, but Lennox, for all those he might have antagonized, even after the Beacons breakup. Who could have hated him so much? An accident, a mistaken identity, a psycho. I hate him. They've got to kill him, fry him. A political assassination might be one thing, but a man who changed the shape of music forever? I can't respond to Laura's tears. Can't summon up those I know are my own. Somebody with a wicked sense of irony hits the jukebox, as if to justify my peremptory sense of restlessness, my need to make myself clean again. Be on my side, I'll be on your side, baby, Neil whines. There is no reason for you to hide. It's so hard for me staying here all alone, when you could be taking me for a ride. She could drag me over the rainbow and send me away. Down by the river, I shot my lady. I rest my arm on Laura's shoulders and stroke her back, and her sobbing slows to a sniffle and a whisper. And I miss Lee so much right now I could cry. I do. I finally break the ice of my face, not for Lennox, who deserves no tears because he was never sentimental and should be honored only with greater enlightenment, not with maudlin music. And not for Jeff Stone, who deserves them, not just as an individual, but as a symbol and a spokesman for countless disenfranchised. And not for Lee, who could never understand my rage, my tears, hers maybe, that of our generation maybe, even the rage that issued from other men, but never the particular quality of my impotent and stolid anger, the rock of anger I find in refuge, in silent defiance of all long-suffering and highly cultivated and mannered madness. But because of my own impulses, I can say it now, I wanted not just to kill Lennox's assassin, I wanted her dead. Another man might have tried. For 3 years now, some demon in me, born in impotence and silence and betrayal, had lodged in my belly like a side-splitting cramp from too much running. I would have liked to have tried. A man more or less cowardly would have. At least, I wanted her dead. Let's get out of here, he tells a woman he is... Let's get out of here, he tells a woman he thinks has become China doll, mannequin, tearful feminine harlequin, not because he thinks her emotion disingenuous, but because he cannot take it seriously, any more than he can take his own grief seriously, nor that of anyone lost in mourning for whichever hero. How many heroes could you mourn, for Christ's sakes? I can't believe it. I don't really think he's dead. Stone, yes. Lennox, I really can't believe it. Neither can I, says the woman, slumping back on her stool. I can see the man on the other side of the GQ guy, because he leans back too and pats her thigh and squeezes it. The Esquire guy has been trying to hustle the woman that he's with, or at least a little bit anyway. There's this other guy he's with. He's a rumpled, chubby rascal of an old soul, one who's chugged many shots in the wakes of many assassinations. And while I hold Laura, I'm massaging her neck while GQ chugs his shot and belches a small, imperfectly muffled belchette. And in the deafening silence that was really a murmuring buzz of low voices, the older guy in the rumpled plaid jacket, a guy who really did write for Esquire when it was something, says, I know what you mean. Reminds me of when I used to... It reminds me of when I used to see Marilyn Monroe. Oh God, here it comes, the name dropping, nasty stuff. Is that all these yo-yos can think of at a time like this? Marilyn Monroe, says the younger one, incredulous and sodden amaze, a dull gleam in his eye. You used to see Marilyn Monroe? Yeah, she and Arthur Miller used to come into the nursery my father-in-law owned in Connecticut. I was clerking there between freelance jobs. They'd buy a lot of gardening supplies, and I even sold her some seeds and bulbs once. I threw in some gardening gloves so she wouldn't scuff up her hands. She liked it. She promised me some squash. Later, I used to see her once in a while at the Wooden Nickel. She would always drink real quietly at the bar. I used to ask myself, what the heck is a famous actress doing drinking all alone? I guess I felt pity for her, sort of, because she seemed to be always alone, even if she was around a lot of people, if you know what I mean. Once I told her that her maid didn't give our delivery boy a $1 tip Miss Monroe had left, and she fished out an Alexander Hamilton and gave it to me for him. After she died, I'd be having a few drinks on a Saturday night, and I'd see her sitting at the other end of the bar. I swear to God. So I changed my nights to Thursdays, and I never saw her again. This is a continuation called The Poet. And we stormed down to the river with a symphony of our vision of paradise sundered, blaring in our ears. After scarfing falafel and gyros in a Mideastern fast food joint, there was nothing either one of us could say. We tried, but failed to make a dent in the awful tin roof of our silence, over which the rain began to plink and plonk, and then to zoom in on us like a camera, a crescendo of timpanis crashing, our only delight in the tight, fearful grip the events of the day held on us. One of those big news days, like a big dream, a yungo bungo of a day, she might say. And I might say that I see myself on one side of the Hudson and she on the other, although in this dream she's not in Manhattan, she's in White Plains. And I'm across in the Palisades dreaming Williams and his gravestone sagacity of soul that echoes Whitman and says, this is America. We'd all better fucking well revel in its flagrant and primitive music. This is the United States blues and it's bad to the bone and we'd all better learn to live with it or we'll be without it. Today that means there ain't going to be no Stone Soul picnic at the end of Strawberry Fields. There's not even going to be a strawberry statement. There's going to be a bloody death at Dakota instead. But basically all you could say was that anyone who would bring a woman out here with him, basically all you could say was that anyone who would bring a woman out here with him after a day like this must be a spiritual pervert, he decides. Both of them shivering in the early December air with the rain coming on harder now. And she's over in White Plains while her father gets the trucking business going in the Bronx first, now in White Plains, later to Rye. And I'm a rebel youth of religious working class parentage in Patterson, and our parents don't know what to think of us seeing someone who lives so far out of the neighborhood. And I hold her and hug her and squeeze her tight, and blood begins to circulate under my soaked to the bone black wool, emaciated Russian emigre topcoat. And she wants me too, and I shiver a couple of minutes more, and I'm thinking, okay, Lord, do it. And the river pelted and pelleted with rain like gunfire. It falls harder and harder. We're still standing under the bus shelter behind a wall of water, looking out at the Hudson overlooking Riverside Park, shivering our kindling hope back into one another like fire, tiny fires catching hold all over our smoldering bones. For if a body were removed from the space which it occupied, and that space remained empty of any body whatsoever, whether of earth, water, air, or sky, there would still remain an empty space. Nothing would be there. It would still be a space. It's from St. Augustine's Confessions, Book 7. The fog wraps itself around every being, building, and space in the city, nuzzling up to the window like a gray bear trying to scratch the lice off its haunches. And the shifting cotton wadding of fog floats in the liquid salmon-colored iridescence emanating from the solemn, hollow-eyed, moon-faced street lamp, bent like a monk over the random refuse, rats, and shuffling homeless. The fog was no longer an adversary, but a way of life. A mistress, I remember thinking. I hear a lisping, frantic shuffling up above us, followed in a few minutes by the whispery cooing and moans of whatever it is that people do to ease the pain, to rosin up the bow for the next concerto, to slip like a second-story man out the window and into the night, reminding them of nothing as they pass from one no-place into the next, from worlds, attics, spaces in the mind changing into other spaces, forming mansions made only of hallways, prisons without fences or doors, in endless maze, as the no exit from one room to the next, passing, as they no exit from one room to the next, passing. Ah, balakawa, passe, passe. So then what did it matter how you got from one disaster to the next? The trick of the eye, I guess, is to keep moving. And for the $64, what did it matter whether you got dumped or were the dumpee? Whether you saved face or not, got in the last word in whatever conversation he was not having with Lee right now. It was only the second to last gesture, like the second effort of his high school football past, only going on forever into infinite exhaustion. Second to last gesture dribbling in a pool filled with second to last gestures, and he didn't care. Still he burned to say the last thing, the absolutely definitive and declarative thing that would make it all right again. He knew there were words like that, but he didn't know what language they were spoken in. He didn't know anyone who did either. He lights a cigarette and drinks in the sheen of moon off her naked sleeping back, then looks at the luminous swath of fog, recalling that as a child he imagined he could see the light streaming down sometimes. The very particles of light themselves, the molecules of light, he thought. And with a child's logic thought maybe he could help scientists see the light itself. But he knew now that what they really needed was a machine to help them see the moral light. And he knew that even if he could see it, he could still choose otherwise every so often. At least enough to keep the game interesting and himself honest. And so would everyone else but morons and saints. And he thought perhaps more practical would be a machine to make manifest not the light, therefore, but the Tao of light, the way it flows. Something that would show the gaseous, lugubrious, sinewy, subatomic cloud shapes of light and dark, like in the close-up of smoke swirls chasing smoke swirls that signaled the beginning of his old favorite detective show, Checkmate. Sorry about Flowerday Falls up here. I had to hurry to get here and I arrived in a sweat. And then reading makes me nervous, which doesn't happen.
And that was an odd scene too there.
I got hot, but the rain cooled things.
Not for me.
Okay, this is from something I'm working on right now. And as such, it's about as much of a fragment as what you just heard, but I think it has a completeness to it. It's from a longer piece that I'm calling Bohemians. There's a sort of a three-part structure I'm envisioning right now called The Town. Let's see, what is
Town without pity's been used.
The Block, the City, the Country. The Block, the Town, the Country. The Block, the Town, the Country. This is The Block. This is from The Block. The Block went on for years. Before there had been months. All right, a few short of a year once, but this was more apocalyptic. 2.5 years since I had made any progress on the book. Actually, I had written one page, and not a very good one at that. Then I realized, write about it. Not a new thought, but all the better since it had not yet been perfected. Block as art, a wasteland of negation, awesomely zen. White space soothing to the eye. To write or not to write was no longer the question. Balance was, or the compensatory function of the unconscious, to quote Jung, or so I told myself. We all have stories we are cataloging, dusty, forlorn stacks of books, whole libraries going begging. But which one? It became obsessive. Why one and not another? Why facts? Why not? Why fictionalize? It's only lying for applause. Why not? You go on like this for a few days and you develop a creative obstruction the size of a good head cold. A few weeks and you're really constipated. A few months and your whole system backs up and your brain eats your own shit for breakfast. See what I mean? As I write this, I'm listening to Oklahoma University's basketball team beat up on the University of Nebraska's to the tune of 57-37 at the half. This is Danny Nee's second season at Nebraska, one of my alma maters. Last year, he took a group of short, determined seniors he inherited from Mo Iba and a couple of junior college transfers and coached them to a 21-12 season and a third-place finish in the NIT. This year, his team is in transition, he says. Billy Tubbs, however, is building an empire at OU to rival Barry Switzer's. In fact, they look alike, he and Switzer. I'm thinking maybe you'd have to be blonde and balding and slick your hair sideways over your bald spot to coach major sports at Oklahoma. Both are Big 8 basketball coaches and intensely competitive. There the similarities end. He is thin, dark-haired, dark-eyed, funny, and bushy of Irish eyebrows that punctuate every expression. He played with then Lou Alcindor at Power Memorial in Brooklyn. Was among the first-class Al McGuire recruited at Marquette. Coached with Digger Phelps at Notre Dame and took Ohio University, Athens, Ohio, to the NCAA playoffs in just a few seasons. Tubbs, who is not, by the way, probably coaching at his own playing weight, is perhaps best personified in a story carried recently by the Lincoln Journal-Star. Oklahoma, by the way, is number 3 in the nation, averaging 102 points a game. Averaging. Anyway, OU was making their famous transition hash out of Southern Undertaker's School of Design or someone by a margin that was approaching 50 points. The final score was like 152 to 79. Late in the second half, the SUSD coach sent one of his players in with a message for Billy. Let up a little. Tubbs responded by ordering his team back into a full-court press. After the game, he threw the press a few juicy tidbits left over from the tasty victory over SUSD. What the other coach wanted was illegal. That's point shaving, he exclaimed. Furthermore, it was unmanly. Mercy. He wanted mercy, said Billy, no doubt with some exasperation in his Jack Nicholson voice. I get up, turn 180 degrees in my chair, put my legs through the slats like I used to as a kid, cross my arms over its back, and turn my Cubs cap around backwards. I look the great white shark in the eye. I stare into the face of the polar bear that is my block, and I say, "Hey, Attila, let up a little, will ya?" It growls, slaps me upside the head, says, "Mercy." He wants mercy. After Nebraska outscores Oklahoma by 5 in the second half, only loses by 15, and keeps Oklahoma 10 points below their average, Danny Nee declares the game a moral victory. In his eyebrows, you knew he was right. Mike called me right after work to tell me that Rabbit was dead. I said I was sorry to hear that. Then we hemmed and hawed, felt hemmed in, and ahemed before he explained that he hadn't been able to reach our wives, who were supposed to be shopping thrift stores for baby stuff, so he called me. Then he said, as if to clear the air of any excess of sentiment, "Seems like he's been dead a long time, doesn't it?" "Yes, it does," said I, like I knew plenty. A man in our neighborhood assaulted me today. Actually, he was standing still and I was moving and he never touched me, except visually. I drove right past, only staring at him long enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Propped up on one leg in crutches on the sloping parkway between the sidewalk and the curb, he listed a little. He looked like an A-frame house that was sinking on one side and about to fall into the street. With a look that combined dismay, disgust, and hurt all in one lined, bespectacled face, he was staring at a seedling of some sort, barely climbing out of the ground. Maybe a foot tall, gnarled. It had a few bumps where branches might be someday. It was apparently a great marvel and vexation to him. Someone, perhaps this very geezer, had put a fence around it and enclosed an area of turned earth about a foot in diameter. In gray cotton work pants, one leg pinned up, plaid shirt and vest, hair slicked back from a line receding at the corners, and a nose the size of a large gherkin, he looked like Lyndon Johnson's shorter, skinnier, younger brother. A displaced farmer, maybe. Or maybe I was just projecting. He couldn't believe the scrawny thing in front of him was alive and growing. Enough, perhaps, that he could not bring himself to uproot it with his bare hands and start all over. Rabbit published The Artificial Hitchhiker at 21 in 1972. He dropped out of the University of Nebraska at Franklin before his senior year, worked as an attendant in a laundromat, and wrote it. Then he sent it to Jonathan Eagle, who loved it, helped him publish it, and got him an MFA at Johns Hopkins, while Rabbit took a few classes over 3 semesters and began in a world full of creatures. Just a note, Franklin, Nebraska is roughly, corresponds to Lincoln, Nebraska. In the photo on the jacket, he looks like the essence of beat haute couture. Black turtleneck, black jeans, short black hair, Van Dyke, black horn-rimmed glasses, leaning back, smoking a cigarette, looking out under slightly drooped eyelids, He seems at ease with himself and in control of his life, if a bit jaded. No intimations of the conspiracy of fail-parted circumstance that laid him out prematurely. Yeah, Hank Williams could sing this one for sure. Rabbit had already written the lyrics. On the album cover would be a short, skinny drunk in a seed cap, workman's clothing, and horn-rimmed glasses, riding over a patch of fur on a chipmunk's face, mainlining cabin still and Lucky's in a dark bar somewhere on the plains. Shot from the viewpoint of the patron next to him, it focuses on the intricacies of the bar's walnut grain and a just-opened letter that says, upside down, "Great stuff, I like it a lot. Cut out the cunts and fucks and I can publish it." And on the back, strewn randomly on a hardwood floor, a pair of worn Tony Lamas, a needle and insulin, and a spilled shot glass. Bluesma had this to say: "The departmental cocktail party was as bad as expected, though he did have a good talk with Kate about the impossibility of getting full-time breadwinning kids and good writing to peacefully coexist in the same lifetime. However, he allowed, having lost any meaningful connection with the traditional 8 hours a day had its benefits. If it wasn't for the low-numbered morning hours, he wouldn't have written much over the last 15 years either. So instead of leave early and have the familiar one-sided conversation flat on his back with his inevitable pal, Darkness, he went to see why Rabbit hadn't made the scene. It wasn't exactly his kind of gig, but there was free booze, and it wasn't like him to pass up that or the chance to offend the departmental chairs, or the chance to offend the departmental chair or his wife. Bluesma said, "I saw smoke slinking over the houses like giant wolf logs, building a snaky pillar through the day for night sky, and I thought, that's where Rabbit is. He's at the fire," and turning the corner, must be practically next door. What if it is Rabbit's place? I pull out, fix on the guy we called Mr. Mello riding his stationary bicycle in front of the tenement porch next to Rabbit's place, and the rest of the eccentrics from next door gathered in an arc on a circumference around the house. Hippie, Dirtball, and Terps from apartment 1, and Holly and Dallas, and the 2-year-old Holly's mom was supposed to sit for, Crystal, who always ended up in Holly's care, which, among other things, was making Holly a rather sad and cynical 5-year-old, and Holly's mom's boyfriend, Steve, who got kicked out one night after a drunken fight in which someone, perhaps Holly's mom, got slapped around, and who, after the cops came and Holly's mom swore out a warrant against him, was made to get his own apartment and forced to live across the street, all from number 2. And the 2 old women from the basement apartment, one pushing the other, the one with Parkinson's in her wheelchair, and of course Twiggy, as Rabbit called her, from number 4, standing beside the 5'4", 240 pounds of Mr. Mello, nonchalantly trotting in place on the exercycle and stroking her long black hair. The rest just stood there, silent as the cavalry, gazing at Custer's remains, except for the 2 old women who were talking about the fire in soft but excited voices and were enjoying some fig Newtons and milk. I screech up, jump the curb with one and then the next front tire, hit the lawn running, glancing at the spectators gathered to the east. "I think you're too late, but maybe somebody should call the fire department anyway," Hippie says. I scream, "Where's Rabbit?" And he shrugs, and the rest of them shrug, except Holly, who says, "It looks pretty. Are you going to put it out?" And I give her the same blank look some Marine gave this Ivy League reporter who asked me, after I grabbed an M16 the same Marine shoved in my face, before we all hunkered down off a helicopter and rolled into the knee-high grass of LZ Scarlet, as NDA regulars made life very difficult for this particular bunch of true and false believers, the true blue and green to guerrilla war USA regulars. Was I covering this war or fighting this war? And I said, I'm in this war. And listen, you of the spotless ass, if you're not absolutely stark raving out of your mind right now, you just have not been paying attention. I trip on the tussocky grass, my Nikes spin and finally grip. I fly to the nearest window, look into the study and say hello to the 4 equestrians of the apocalypse, all done up in their traditional black-hooded capes and their horses, Whitey, Red-Eye, Blackie, and Pale. And they say in unison like the Lennon sisters or someone, "Hello, Jeff, looking for a rabbit?" And I say, "Never mind." And I race around back, then in front, looking at every window for a sign of rabbit or life of any kind, and each a conniption fit of combustion. The small white house rolls up in skeins of dark wolf loss, tumbling into cottony billows, floating northeasterly in the huge, now polluted river of Big Sky. Blotting out and then revealing the sunlight, everything is very contrasting, like early movies. And someone like myself is running around and pounding on the superheated glass, circling the house like a Buster Keaton. I beg Hippie and the other cracked pots from next door, would someone, anyone, call the fire department, please? And then I remember Hui, not a flashback, which I never could really understand. A complete dip in the drink of the unconscious, I suppose. But a memory so vivid and strong, time resonates, reverberates, bellies out like a long, high, insanely intricate Hendrix-like lick on something from the Star-Spangled Banner, or the slide-induced skitsy tonalities and warped-out scales of Watchtower. We were getting it pretty good from the air, from our own, of course. Not an unusual experience over there, though you take that risk in combat of any stripe, of wasting your own, that is. Anyway, after Tet, the NBA had occupied the Imperial City for weeks, and command was pissed. The whole situation had gone on long enough. We were going to burn up nearly every square foot of it to win it back. What would be there when we were done was never spelled out. I had been up there when it seemed serene and secure, so you never really knew what was. And that image triumphed briefly against the way of scorched earth all around. I told myself, you've got to quit this life on the run. I believe it's killing you. During that first visit, and then, as if for the first time, at Rabbit's place. Like overcooked turkeys, meat falling off our bones, we were trying to get our own sorry bods and a couple of Vietnamese kids to the other side of the river, and we're slinking along the wall separating the esplanade from the bank. With cover, of course, but the returning fire up the bank almost had us pinned. So we went along single file, 4 grunts, myself, and 2 girls suspected of being Viet Cong, sisters maybe, about 12 and 10. With some difficulty, we crossed the river and took a left alongside it a while. About 20 feet along the path by the river, we met a Vietnamese father of 30-some years who was holding the charred, limp body of his infant daughter, looked to be. Some of the hair was unburned and hung down to about the earlobes. We all passed it single file without even a groan, but continued to move toward the citadel, and the silence booming around us. Before me were passing visions of the perfume river along Le Loy, a way of girls on bicycles, lovers along the parkway, of sampans on the river and children playing on the esplanade, while our planes dropped exploding wrecking balls and demolished the French-inspired architecture of the university nearby, acres at a time. Full of self-righteous outrage, impotent but mobilized, the stuff of mobs compressed into one man, I imagine holding Rabbit up to Hippie and friends, the English department, and all of Franklin as they were made by some demonology of muses to pass by single file in silence. At this I stopped running, still slapping my arms at my sides, and the smell starts to get to me. The soot, tar, asphalt smell. I know it's all over. Just as in Way I knew. After we got to the checkpoint, got the girls to safety and the MPs, and I got lucky on a chopper full of dead to Phu Bai and then to Da Nang, that I would be eating steaks, drinking scotch, and planning my story, and a whole bunch of civilian soldiers and everything in between would still be skulking around, bleeding on and dying in Way. It made me dizzy and a little giddy, but I thought then that I would be okay. I would outlive the war. Just as now, Rabbit was gone and I was left to write it. Gone. Goodbye. Bye. Say bye-bye to Rabbit, Jeff, said another inmate. This is still in quotes, this is still bluesman. I don't go back to Crete that night, staying in efficiency in the basement of the Great Plains Motel, 27th and O in Franklin, right next to the Vivid Color photo lens, where I had the slides of the wet pile of ash developed the next day. It was a neat little white box of a room, and its cutest feature was under the range, a little white refrigerator that I didn't even notice until I accidentally opened it, fiddling with the controls to the stove. When I looked inside, 2 12-packs appeared. Either I hallucinated a whole drunk or somebody left them and the cleaning crew forgot the fridge. After finishing one of them, I call Bobby and say, Rabbit's dead. I have to stay in town tonight and help take care of a few things in the morning, not knowing if that was really true. Are you all right, she says. I think so, but I can't talk about it right now. I just need to be alone for a while. I'll be home in the evening right after classes, I say, like I know what I'm talking about. I think I can speak, this is again the narrator, I think I can speak for both bluesmen and myself when I say it was one of those ugly, beautiful drums. That's an understatement, but the best I can do in a few words. It is a commonplace in North American culture that really good writing, bravely called literature or English literature in universities, cannot occur if the author gets too obsessed with political concerns or moralizes too much about his favorite issues. I believe the conventional wisdom goes something like this. If one neglects the personal for the political, one loses, among other things, the possibility of communicating with those whose politics are different or indifferent. One also, it goes, will come dangerously close to writing mere propaganda, diminishing the possibility of art by losing sight of the universal, revealed through the personal, or the billboard realities of the political. True art proceeds by indirection, by process of playing cat and mouse with the truth. Political sentiments intrude into and obfuscate real meaning by being too bold, too arrogant in their pursuit of what are obviously generalities, while real art is concerned only with the precise arrangement of tens and hundreds and thousands of particulars. At this point, it might also be important to explain that in the essence of the real West, the American West, this generality holds true in spades. The good cowboy has no time for the fancy, airy stuff that city intellectuals concoct at coffee houses and at art openings. Life is simple out here. The good earth needs tending, planting, and cultivating, then harvesting. Cattle need to graze, copulate, and calve. When they graze long enough in one spot, they need to be moved. That managing all these affairs, though basic in concept, demands a powerful and abiding concentration, given the vagary of bugs, weather, prices, politicians, bankers, and occasionally fickle consumers. Still, these basic notions contribute to a man's and a woman's sense of sanity. They keep a body rooted in reality, down to the nitty-gritty. If you have time for shit like abstract art, whatever that is, or worse, socialism and other left-wing nonsense, you're worse than the worst rodeoers. Obviously, you just haven't been working hard enough. My simple proposition is this. Rabbit was my friend. He died young of complications brought on by diabetes and alcoholism, but I still don't know what he did. Politics, art, small-town smugness, big-town smugness, intellectualism, anti-intellectualism, Vietnam, anti-Vietnam, or perhaps a paranoia brought on by an inability to keep close enough track of the task at hand, or something even more cosmic and degenerate, some form of spiritual entropy. X, we'll call it. So the bluesman finally called a little later that night and said, "Hi, Rabbit's dead." I said, "I know," Mike told me. "I'm getting dizzy." He was psyched, you could tell. "Come on down and you can get dizzy too," he added with syncopated enthusiasm. "I'm working on morose for the next 12-pack. Come on down and you can get morose too. I'm at the Great Plains Motel, room 86, in town. Bring your own case. We work at it a little, I'm sure we can move right through. We can move right on through and hit true melancholy. Then perhaps a near-death experience. You know, some chemical and germ warfare of the soul. Fun stuff. But hurry, campers. This blue light special won't last all night. I got to teach tomorrow." "Bluesman," I said calmly, "you're a real cataleptic converter, you know that? A true onion of paradise." "What could be more special than this?" he asked, as if it were virtually cliché. "I don't know, my main bent frame, I don't know. Give me 20 minutes. I got to tell Carrie. Mike called about 10 minutes ago, and I've only been home about a half hour. Haven't worked up the gumption or abject self-destructiveness or whatever to tell her yet. There could be some serious fallout, but I don't think I could do much for her right now. She's got a sitter coming over. She was going to catch a bite to eat with Jenny after doing the thrift store thing. Now they can have a good cry. That's probably best. But I just can't dump it on her and flee. Why not? What difference could it possibly make now? I don't know. I guess if you can't salvage the substance of a bad situation, you grasp for style. Okay, GQ guy, but if you find me face down, it's your fault. I'll try to remember that," I said, and hung up. It became a real ball of earwax, a real shit-kicker's hoedown. We discussed Rabbit's good points and his bad points, and most of the points in between. "Itemized?" Bluesma asked, smiling a look of grim efficiency. "Read the book," I respond. And the room got big, oceanic, agoraphobic as the plains, and Rabbit was everywhere. And the room got small, and Rabbit shrunk until he disappeared under the crescent moon of grit under my fingernails. I told this to Jeff, and he said, "No, it just seems like the room's getting bigger. And I said, no, it just seems like Rabbit's getting deader. I guess he just can't get any deader than this, Jeff said after a while, toasting this skinny memory of this skinny guy with the wrong beer. At least that's my understanding of how the system works. They cash in Rabbit and divide him up into little memories to be spread around the earth. Doesn't seem like a square deal, does it? No. Seems like life insurance. The room reflected Sears white. The low-rent neighborhoods in hell must be like this. You get a cable TV in a studio apartment with a basement window all done up in hygienic-looking semi-gloss. Reflects light, washes easily. In a place like this, the lowlifes gather in each other's rooms to pick at the paint, watch ESPN, and drink. We watched Leave It to Beaver, The Andy Griffith Show, and an A&E documentary on Nam. We both wanted to shut it off immediately, but it riveted us in spite of ourselves. Again in quotes. In defense of freedom and democracy and related ideals, I went to that blowout in Southeast Asia that lately I have taken to calling the little one, Bluesma resumed, as in, I was in the little one. But I didn't go for any armed service except the AP, which let us carry cameras and notebooks, at least when I was a stringer. No, mostly I freelanced for the Lefty and Free Press in the US and Europe. I got a piece into Esquire once. That was about as good as it got. It was not a lucrative existence. It was, for a time, an exciting one, then a very exhausting one, Bluesma said into the micro-cassette recorder I brought to document our innermost ravings on a night like this. He said when he came back, sick of journalism and war, he enrolled in a poetry writing class at Rutgers while covering the prison beat for the Trenton Times, and began an extended series of prose poems, tortured landscapes and portraits from Nam and beyond that had won him a couple of awards, a contract with Viking, and a job teaching the writing of poetry at the University of Nebraska, Franklin. Rabbit, on the other hand, avoided the draft by amassing the greatest collection of how I flunked my physical stories and choosing the one he liked best, which worked. I fought it out in prose with my draft board the year after they quit drafting, when Selective Service processed the first 50 numbers anyway, just in case, mine among them. They looked at my application for conscientious objector status, read 12 pages of earnest answers to earnest questions about making people dead, and the earnest letters of endorsement from prominent ministers and counselors, and gave me a 1-0 without even asking to see me. By then, they must have been so tired of people with objections to this war, they probably got headaches and blurred vision when the subject came up. I went on religious grounds, by then nearly airtight. Jesus said, "Don't sell your arguments by going on a killing spree," or something like that. So we have all been obsessed with where it will be Nam all over again, and how old our boys will be at the time. Needless to say, I wish, if nothing else, that Rabbit would have lived long enough for Aaron to have really known him. Because right alongside whatever love sex talk I'm going to have with him, there's going to be the one about war and death. That hasn't been a standard part of growing up until now. It should have been. And I'm going to have to try to explain pacification, DMZ, hearts and minds, body count, Victor Charles, the Vietnam syndrome, the current confused state of American manhood, etc. And that will lead to tales of Rabbit, Bluesma, and their ilk, and peace now, the most crucial part of the whole love, sex, war, death nexus. Rabbit left the ranch near Pine Ridge at 16, having graduated salutatorian from high school a year early, and came to Franklin in its land-grant university. He suffered too much stage fright with the girls and stayed in his dorm room too much, writing bad poetry in the manner of Keats crossed with the worst of the cowboy poets, but he liked most of his classes and did well enough academically his first 2 years. Or so Bluesma said that Rabbit had told him later, much later, when he returned to UNF in '76 as a professor of creative writing, having been lured away from Colorado State with the promise of heading up a then-fetal creative writing program, which would soon be born into a national leader under his direction. Iowa, after all, had proven you could lure top talent to nowheres by giving them a few classes and money to write on. But during the summer between his sophomore and junior years, he began to frequent the Blue Bar, take on bohemian airs, and get into discussions about abstract expressionism, jazz, folk music, the Kennedy assassination, civil rights, the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones, etc. Even though at the time, for example, his favorite group was Paul Revere and the Raiders, he said. He loved those three-cornered hats, the ponytails, and the zany tomfoolery of where the action is. Needless to say, at least for those who know this bar, he also became infatuated with the blues. He began taking classes in painting and sculpture, music appreciation, acting, and playwriting, forsaking the wildlife biology major he and his dad had charted out for him. But in none of these pursuits did he distinguish himself, only enough that his instructors didn't actually discourage him. In some cases, in painting and acting, for instance, told him to keep working. And of course, as befitting a young man of intellectual aspirations at this time, there was the matter of this police action in Southeast Asia with which he was becoming increasingly obsessed. At this point, he drank no more than the other joie de vivre crowd he was running with, and insulin might as well have been a miracle factor, or so Bluesma said. But when he helped lead a takeover of the Military and Naval Science Building during the student strike over the invasion of Cambodia, just before Kent State, he got his 15 minutes of fame, at least statewide anyway. Someone broke some windows at the draft board office before they marched to occupy M&M. And someone else tried to torch the place by taking out a piece of paper and lighting it, and another student took it away and put it out. The students were accused of being commie dupes. Rabbit and the three other non-leaders were hated all over the state, and Rabbit's dad quit speaking to him. So how do you add it all up, Bluesman asked me, craning his neck from under the cubbyhole in which he was speedily curled, having crawled into the small desk opposite the foot of the bed. How do you figure? I don't know, I said. Microwaves? Bluesman spit in his beer, sloshed it around, took a swig, sloshed this around, gargled with it a little, and spit it in the wastebasket nearby. He said once he realized he had no purchase on the situation at the big bonfire, he got the heebie-jeebies thinking about being there when the fire department and FPD showed up. So he got back in his car and drove around downtown a while, trying to think. He gave up on that shortly and went to the apartment of a former grad student of his, who is now a legislative aide, and asked her to let him in the Capitol building. Rabbit's dead and I need to think, he told her. She didn't question it, and once he got up there, he began to calm down just a little, he explained. The sky darkened fast, courtesy of draining light and billowing smoke, and I headed Chesterfield and watched the pyre and the termites of authority gathering around, not fleeing from, the burning lumber, the red and blue lights flashing, the crowd congealing like a blood clot, the hoses fired like Roman candles, the axes made kindling of the door, and a couple of hours after I arrived at Rabbit's place, it was dead. I felt an odd sense of peaceful exhaustion, I remember thinking. He's your best friend and you go numb? But looking out over Franklin's grassy Capitol grounds, a full city block of building and greensward, past the governmental offices and insurance firms to the farms along the edge of town, I just wanted to be left alone for the rest of my life. And plowmen dig my earth, I thought. And then I saw him. A big skin, 6'3" or 4, crew cut, bandana headband, sleeveless flannel shirt and blue jeans, a tattoo that said death before dishonor, and a straw cowboy hat he held over his hands. Marines, I thought. And then he said, Jeff, like he'd known me a long time but hadn't seen me recently. You don't remember me, do you? He said. No, what are you doing up here? Hiding. I just broke into that house down there. Which? The one on fire. You don't remember me? I'm a friend of Rabbit's from the Res. No? Never mind, he mumbled and became distracted. It doesn't matter, but we've got to find some way out of here. Why? Look. He pointed down to the congregation of a few squad cars, and I shuffled back from the slit of a window, leaning against the wall. I leaned forward to take another peek out, then stopped, looking at him, at where he had been, and nothing. I fluttered around and around the 4 turrets for about an hour, never heard footsteps, and left when Franklin's serve and protect boys packed it in to chase better leads. I kept expecting to see a big Indian lumbering across the Capitol lawn and the powers that be in pursuit, something right out of Cuckoo's Nest, but I never did. Then I walked over to Writer's Block to see Mike and told him to call you. That's probably been enough. Thank you.